Hey guys, welcome back. We're doing predictions for UFC on Fox 26, Lawler versus Dos Anjos. Follow me on Twitter. My link is in the description. At MMA Breakdown Zero. Check out my predictions for the event before this one. Swanson versus Ortega. Um, yeah. Fight Pass prelims at welterweight. Sheldon Westcott versus Danny Roberts. Definitely going with Danny Roberts here. May look to bet on this one. I think I will, yeah. Westcott hasn't fought since, was it 2016 or 2015? Okay, January of 2016, but, still a long time. Almost 2 years. And, that's not a good thing here. Danny Roberts has fought, three, four, or five times since then. And Westcott seems to me like a one-dimensional fighter. He's a wrestler, grappler, looking to get it to the ground to work his submissions. His only win in his two fights was against Edgar Garcia. Not a credible UFC fighter. And other than that, Pavel Pavlik destroyed him. I mean, Westcott looked feeble against him in that fight. Just looked like physically he couldn't compete with him, and just got worked from the striking to the grappling. That was an ugly fight for him. So I'm going with Roberts, who may struggle a little bit with the wrestling here. That seems to be Roberts' weak point, but he's not a bad grappler. Had that triangle submission win against was it Nathan Coy, I believe, and has power in his hands. He can still get hit, and Bobby Nash kind of coming out and putting a pace on him and landing shots. Not a really good look. But he did manage to get the knockout in that fight. Almost went the distance with Perry in a really back and forth fight. So the guy has a chin, and he's got power in his hands. And Westcott is kind of a one-dimensional wrestler who is not all that dominant and has already been, had that game plan thwarted by a guy who I don't even know off the top of my head is in the UFC anymore. So going with Roberts here by TKO, I think. And I think I may look to place a bet on that one. I'm not certain yet, but I think so. And welterweight, Nordine Taleb versus Sultan Aliev. I'm going Taleb. Not impressed at all with Aliev. Thought he looked horrible against Velikovic. For every moment that fight was on the feet, he looked scared, uncomfortable. Looked like he was going to get knocked out at any minute by Velikovic. And he seemed like he had to work really hard for his takedowns, and even on the ground, Velikovic was threatening with submissions from his back, so he was just, fighting off threats from Velikovic all fight in all positions, and then had that knockout, crazy spinning back fist knockout loss to Kenny Robertson. So not high on the guy. Nordine Taleb, a really tactical, technical striker, kind of the prototypical tri-star fighter. Made some big strides, I think, getting the knockout win over Eric Silva, and having a pretty competitive fight with Ponzinibbio. But then his last fight against what was the kid's name? Eric Unklin, something like that. I believe he's a Norwegian fighter making his debut. But that fight was not all that impressive. kind of was just able to get by on his experience and his technical ability, but the kid who he fought, was able to land some shots in that fight and kind of do better than I expected. So I wouldn't put it completely past Taleb here to give up takedowns and get out wrestled. But I think he's probably going to be able to keep it on the feet enough and work his jab enough to outbox Aliev. So not a hugely confident pick, but I like Taleb. All right, at welterweight, Jordan Meehan versus Eric Silva. Totally weird fight. Two guys on the outs and, bad chins, or at least, Silva has the bad chin, but both guys, look shop-worn. Just look like they can't really do this anymore. But of the two, the guy who I think has more left in the tank, I think is Eric Silva. He's at least picked up a win since, in his most recent run. Eric Silva, I think he can hit takedowns on Mean. Emil Meek was able to. Mean's still a crafty striker, and we saw that early in his fight against Meek before he seemed to just kind of quit and wilt under the pressure and the pace of Meek. Barely, saw that striking ability against Muhammad, but he can still be crafty. I could see him possibly, cracking Silva, who's just got a bad chin. Goes out pretty quickly against any kind of dangerous power striker that he faces. But over 3 rounds, Mean is not a consistent, stable fighter. And Eric Silva, I think, has that game with the grappling, the takedowns to win a decision. So I'm going to take Eric Silva by decision. All right, FS1 prelims. At middleweight, Alessio Di Chirico versus Oluwale Bamgbose. I don't see how Bamgbose just doesn't totally run through Di Chirico. Di Chirico is a scrappy fighter, but kind of a subpar athlete, and really doesn't offer much in the way of lethality. So, and Bamgbose, is just a freight train early in fights. What was not deterred against Borrachinha, went after him early and made that a tough fight for Borrachinha early on. And just with all of his unorthodox, unpredictable strikes and his, his blitzing speed and really big power, I think he's just going to light up Di Chirico and put him away. So going with Bamgbose by TKO, and that's one that I'll be looking to place a bet on. All right, a lightweight, John Makdessi versus Abel Trujillo. This seems to be the card a little bit of guys who can't do this anymore, and I think Makdessi probably shouldn't be fighting. Makdessi can be knocked out. We saw that against Lando Venata in just his last fight. But even Mehdi Baghdad, even though Makdessi was doing pretty well in that fight, is technically outstriking him. Mehdi Baghdad dropped him, I believe it was in the 3rd round. And there's just no danger to, just like the last guy we talked about, there's no danger to Makdessi's game anymore. And I think that, Trujillo, he's probably not quite the same fighter either. Hasn't been fighting actively, and his fight with Rinaldi was not all that great. But he can hit takedowns in this fight. He can close the distance and make this a grimy fight for Makdessi, who's never really liked the ground. If you think about his loss to Dennis Hallman, that was a really ugly loss. And the power, Trujillo, he has no reservations about getting into a brawl. And technically he's not a very good striker. Jamie Varner almost finished the guy, almost knocked him out. But I think against Makdessi, a guy who's hittable, who has a bad chin now, and a guy who is really kind of a super athlete in Trujillo, who will just go after guys. I think he's going to hit Makdessi and put him away. So I'm going Trujillo by knockout. I don't know. I'd like to bet on that one, but I could definitely see Trujillo just getting outworked technically by Makdessi too. I think that's a possibility, but I like Trujillo. A flyweight Tim Elliott versus Pietro Manga, and I have to be honest, I didn't even know that this fight changed, because it was supposed to be Elliott versus Scoggins, so I haven't done any research for this one. Have no idea who Manga is, so maybe I'll throw my pick in the description once I make my pick, do my research for that. I was going to take Justin Scoggins in the original matchup, but kind of caught off guard here. So moving on, at welterweight, Chad Laprise versus Galore Bofando, and this is an incredible matchup. Obviously, Laprise should be the big favorite on paper. He's really been getting a lot more technical. Really like his volume, and really doesn't seem to let up with his technique anymore. Kind of like he did in the Brian Barberena fight. Got tired, got sloppy by the third round, and Barberena took over, almost stole it. But in his last fight against Brian Camozzi, was just clean and smooth all the way through. Really mixing up his strikes and his kicks. A really diverse technical kickboxer. Before that, had a very clean knockout over Thibaut Guti. So I think he's really been improving, doing well. But Galore Bofando, this guy is insane. The head throw knockout he had over Charlie Ward, just something crazy stuff you don't see. And even when I was doing research for that fight, and I was watching his pre-UFC fights, just the way the guy strikes and kicks, it's a very unorthodox. I know I use that word all the time, but his style truly seems to be something unusual and different. Very dexterous, just has a very unusual style of kicking and striking. And we saw it with that throw in the Charlie Ward fight. Just something completely out of the ordinary, and was able to finish the guy with it. And I don't think it's a fluke. I think this guy has a knack, a gift for just pulling off these kind of big, athletic, high power, unusual offensive moves, and I think he can get an opportunity to do that against Laprise. Even though I just said Laprise has been able to stay consistent in fights, Laprise kind of falls apart when he fights guys who can just physically overwhelm him, or guys who don't respect his technical striking. Like Trinaldo just clocked him in the first round, and that was it. Brian Barberena, as we just mentioned, pushed that pace on him late.